Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dark Whispers. Tonight, I have another terrifying horror story that might make you think twice before working the night shift. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's begin. They say old police radios never truly go silent. Sometimes they keep talking long after everyone on the other end is gone. I never believed stories like that. I thought old equipment was just broken. Static was only static. At least, that's what I believed before I started working the night shift. Looking back now, I wish I had ignored that old radio forever. My name is Mason. Last winter I worked nights for a small private security company. Most shifts were painfully quiet. I watched security cameras, checked locked doors, filled out reports, and drank too much coffee to stay awake. Nothing unusual ever happened. Until one evening my supervisor placed an old police radio on my desk. "The cameras sometimes fail," he said. "Keep this nearby." I laughed when I saw the dusty radio. It looked like something from another century. "Does it even work?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Only one channel still does." I turned the dial. The display stopped on channel 6. Before leaving, my supervisor looked at me seriously. "Whatever you hear, don't answer." For several nights nothing happened. The radio only produced soft static. Occasionally a burst of interference filled the room before disappearing again. I almost forgot it was there. Then, exactly at 2:13 one morning, the speaker suddenly crackled to life. A frightened woman's voice whispered through the static. "Officer, please respond." I looked around the empty office. Nobody else was working that night. The voice returned. "We have a missing child." Then silence. I assumed another emergency frequency had crossed into ours. Old radios sometimes picked up strange signals. That explanation made sense. Or at least it did until the following night. At exactly 2:13 a.m. the radio spoke again. The same woman's voice sounded calm this time. "We found footprints. They lead into the woods." Curious, I searched local news on my phone. There were no reports about missing children. No police activity. No search teams. It was as if the radio was describing an incident that had never happened. The dispatcher continued speaking. Date of incident: October 18, 1987. I stared at the radio in disbelief. 1987? That call was almost 40 years old. Before I could think, another voice interrupted. A police officer answered. "I'm following the tracks. They lead toward the old fire tower." The transmission became distorted. Heavy static filled the room. Then I heard screaming. The sound lasted only a few seconds before the signal disappeared completely. My heart raced. The office suddenly felt colder. I couldn't explain why, but it felt as though I had just listened to something that was never meant to be heard again. The next evening I couldn't stop thinking about the radio. I kept glancing at the clock. When it reached exactly 2:13 a.m., the speaker came alive once more. This time the dispatcher didn't report another incident. Instead she quietly spoke a single word. "Mason." I froze. She had just said my name. I had never told anyone my name over the radio. The voice returned. "Mason, don't let him hear you." Every light inside the security office flickered. The radio hissed loudly. Then another voice came through. Deep. Slow. Cold. Too late. At that exact moment, every security monitor suddenly went completely black. I had never told anyone my name over the radio. The voice returned. "Mason, don't let him hear you." Every light inside the security office flickered. The radio hissed loudly. Then another voice came through. Deep. Slow. Cold. Too late. At that exact moment, every security monitor suddenly went completely black. Then I heard it. Slow footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the office door. One step, then another. They were heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. I locked the office door and backed away. The radio hissed again. "Don't let him hear you breathe," the dispatcher whispered. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then came 3 slow knocks. Each knock sounded heavier than the last. The doorknob slowly began to turn. Someone was trying to open the door. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stepped backward without making a sound. "Mason." The woman's voice trembled through the radio. "Whatever happens, don't answer the door." Another knock echoed through the office. Then another. The entire room seemed to shake. I could hear slow breathing on the other side of the door. It wasn't human. It sounded deep, dry, and impossibly close. Suddenly every voice on Channel 6 began talking at once. Dispatchers. Police officers. Children crying. Men screaming. Dozens, maybe hundreds of voices filled the room. They all repeated the same terrifying sentence. "He's looking for someone alive." The sound became almost unbearable. I covered my ears, but the voices only grew louder. Without warning, everything stopped. Complete silence. Even the radio went quiet. Then a loud metallic sound echoed through the hallway. It reminded me of old elevator doors slowly opening. The dispatcher finally spoke again. Her voice was calm this time. "Subject has left your floor." I didn't move. A few seconds later, the light suddenly returned. Every monitor switched back on as if nothing had happened. The hallway outside appeared completely empty. No broken lock. No footprints. No sign that anyone had ever been there. Only the old police radio remained on my desk, quietly humming with static. The next morning I found my supervisor in his office. Before I could speak, he asked a strange question. "Did Channel 6 talk to you?" I slowly nodded. The color drained from his face. Without another word, he unlocked an old filing cabinet and removed a yellowed newspaper from inside. The newspaper was dated October 1987. Across the front page was a headline that made my stomach tighten. "Security guard missing during night shift." Beneath the article was a black and white photograph of a smiling young guard standing outside the same building where I worked. His name was Mason Carter. My hands began to shake. I looked at my supervisor. "What happened to him?" He stared at the photograph for several seconds before quietly answering. "Nobody knows." He closed the newspaper and looked directly into my eyes. "He disappeared during his shift." Then he whispered something I will never forget. Just like the voices said. I couldn't stop thinking about the newspaper. The smiling young guard in the photograph looked almost my age. His name was Mason Carter. He had vanished during a night shift in the very same building where I now worked. I asked my supervisor if they had ever found him. He slowly shook his head. "Not a trace," he replied. "The investigation ended years ago. The case was never solved." There was one strange detail, my supervisor continued. Everyone who worked that night reported hearing voices over an old police radio. I stared at him without speaking. "The officers searched the entire building," he said. "Every room. Every hallway. Every locked door. They found nothing. But Mason was simply gone." I looked toward the old radio sitting on my desk. It remained completely silent. I reached out and switched it off. Then I pulled the battery from the back. "That should be the end of it," I whispered to myself. My supervisor didn't answer. Instead, he quietly looked out the office window, as though he expected something to happen. That evening, I resigned from my job. I packed my belongings and left the building without looking back. Before driving home, I stopped beside a river. I held the old police radio in my hands for several seconds. Then I threw it into the dark water. It disappeared beneath the surface without making much of a splash. I felt relieved for the first time in days. Weeks passed. I found a new job in another town. Different building. Different company. Different people. I told myself everything was finally over. The nightmare slowly faded. I almost convinced myself the radio had only been a strange coincidence. Then one rainy Monday morning, everything changed again. I opened my locker before starting work. Sitting neatly on the top shelf was the same old police radio. Dirty. Scratched. Water stains still covered the metal casing. I froze. Nobody else could have placed it there. I had never told anyone about the river. My hand started trembling as I slowly reached toward it. Before I could touch it, the speaker crackled to life. Static filled the room. Then I heard the familiar dispatcher's voice. Calm. Cold. Unmistakable. Mason. She whispered. My blood turned to ice. Channel 6 never closes. The radio fell silent again. Every hair on my arm stood up. Suddenly the lights above me flickered. The hallway outside my locker room became unusually quiet. Then I heard slow footsteps somewhere behind me. 1, 2, 3. They stopped just outside the door. I didn't dare turn around. My breathing became shallow as I remembered every warning I had ever been given. A deep voice spoke from somewhere in the darkness. You answered once. It whispered. Now it's your turn to listen. I closed my eyes and remained completely still. After several long seconds, the footsteps slowly faded away. When I finally looked behind me, the hallway was empty. Only silence remained. I still work the night shift. Every night, before midnight, I check my locker. Sometimes the radio is there. Sometimes it isn't. But every single night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., I hear static somewhere in the building. I never answer. I never follow the voices. Because some channels were never meant for the living. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more true horror stories every week. And remember, if Channel 6 ever calls your name, don't answer.